The notice was crumpled in my hands, the bold red letters glaring at me like an accusation, violation, unauthorized entrance design. Fine, $89. I let out a slow breath, feeling my pulse quicken. It wasn't about the money. It was about the principle. I had lived in this neighborhood for over a decade, maintained my property immaculately, and yet, the HOA cops had decided my entrance was an offense worthy of a fine. Little did they know, they weren't just dealing with an average homeowner. They were messing with a lawyer. And this? This was about to become their biggest mistake. I glanced at my front entrance, the very same one that had stood untouched for years. The smooth stone pathway, the well-trimmed hedges, the classic oak door, nothing was out of place. Nothing had changed. So why now? Why was this suddenly a violation? My instincts screamed foul play. HOA boards thrived on intimidation, banking on homeowners blindly following their absurd rulings without question. But they just tangled with the wrong person. I unfolded the notice again, scanning the fine print. No specific clause, no reference to an actual HOA rule, just a vague statement about design inconsistencies. A weak excuse, a bluff. But instead of anger, a slow smile curled on my lips. If they thought I'd roll over like their usual victims, they were in for a nasty surprise. I decided to test the waters. Instead of charging in, fists swinging, I played it cool. I sent a polite email to the HOA office, requesting clarification on the alleged violation. No accusations, no challenges, just a simple inquiry. And then, I waited. Their response would tell me everything I needed to know. 2 days later, an email popped into my inbox. The message was cold, dismissive, and laced with authority they didn't actually have. They claimed my entrance had been reported by multiple board members for not meeting community standards. Again, no specifics, no clear violations. Just empty threats and bureaucratic nonsense. But the real kicker? They demanded immediate payment or threatened to escalate the matter to legal action. That was it. That was my invitation to war. I had spent years battling real legal cases in courtrooms, dismantling complex arguments, exposing fraud, and outmaneuvering aggressive prosecutors. Did they really think I'd be rattled by an $89 fine and some flimsy threats? If anything, I was insulted by how little effort they put into their intimidation tactics. But if they wanted to play this game, I'd play. And I'd win. I dug into the HOA bylaws, poring over every single clause. I wasn't looking for my defense, I was looking for their mistakes. And it didn't take long to find one. Their fine was illegal. The board had no authority to issue penalties without a formal hearing, no right to demand payment without a clear violation outlined in their own regulations. They had overstepped, and they had no idea I was about to shove their own rules down their throats. But before I made my move, I needed leverage. A confrontation wouldn't be enough, I needed to expose them, humiliate them, and make them regret ever thinking they could pull this on me. And so, I went digging. Public records, financial reports, past complaints against the HOA. And that's when I found something big. A detail so damning, so explosive, that I had to read it twice just to make sure I wasn't imagining things. The HOA board had been illegally pocketing homeowners' fines for years. And now, they had just fined the wrong person. The moment I uncovered the illegal financial activity, a slow realization dawned on me, this wasn't just about my entrance fine. It was about years of unchecked power, corruption, and manipulation that had gone unnoticed. The HOA board had been funneling homeowner fines into personal accounts, disguising them as community improvement funds while inflating maintenance costs on paper. The numbers didn't add up, and the deeper I dug, the worse it got. Tens of thousands of dollars had vanished under vague expense reports, untraceable to any legitimate repairs or projects. They weren't just enforcing fake fines, they were running a full-blown racket. And they had just made the stupidest mistake of their lives by targeting me. I kept my findings quiet for now. Patience was key. If I made my move too soon, they'd cover their tracks. I needed them to feel untouchable, confident, unchallenged. That way, they'd get sloppy, and when they did, I'd be there to drag them straight into legal hell. I knew exactly how HOA boards worked. The president held the strings, but the real power lay in their enforcers. The so-called HOA cops, self-important, clipboard-wielding nobodies who thrived on petty authority. They were the enforcers of this corruption, blindly issuing fines, threatening homeowners, and strong-arming compliance. If I was going to bring this entire system down, I needed to hit them first. And so, I baited them. I deliberately ignored the fine. I let their first warning turn into a second, then a third. I knew how they operated. They needed fear to control people. If I didn't respond, they'd escalate, pushing harder until they thought they had me cornered. That's when I'd strike. And right on schedule, it happened. One evening, just after sundown, I heard the sound of footsteps crunching on my driveway. I didn't even need to look. They had arrived. 3 of them stood outside, wearing cheap polo shirts with the HOA emblem embroidered on the chest. Clipboards in hand, self-importance dripping from their smug expressions. I watched from my window as they took photos of my entrance, scribbled notes, and whispered to each other like they were solving some great crime. They weren't here for a simple fine anymore, they wanted blood. Sure enough, a piece of paper was slapped onto my front door before they strutted off, thinking they had just won. I stepped outside and peeled it off. A violation notice. This time, the fine had been raised to $350, with a final warning of legal action. The wording was more aggressive, an attempt to intimidate me into paying up. But here's where they miscalculated. They thought I was an ordinary homeowner. They had no idea they had just threatened a lawyer. I spent the next 24 hours drafting the kind of legal response that rips through arrogance like a knife through butter. I outlined every violation they had committed, not just against me, but against multiple homeowners in the neighborhood. I cited the exact HOA bylaw sections they had ignored, the state laws they had broken, and the financial discrepancies I had uncovered. And then, just to twist the knife, I made sure to CC every single homeowner in the community on the email. I barely had time to sip my morning coffee before the backlash erupted. Neighbors flooded my inbox with messages, some furious, some grateful, all equally shocked. People had suspected the HOA of corruption, but no one had proof, until now. And the best part? The HOA board had no idea the storm that was about to hit them. But I wasn't done. Public exposure was only the first step. I wanted legal repercussions, real consequences. So I made my next move. I filed an official complaint with the state HOA regulatory board, attaching every single document I had uncovered. The fraud, the mismanagement, the intimidation tactics. I didn't just want them fined. I wanted them investigated, audited, and prosecuted. And once that was set in motion, I waited. Because I knew exactly what would happen next. The HOA wasn't just going to roll over and accept defeat. No, they were going to fight back. And if they were stupid enough to escalate this further, I was going to make sure it would be the last mistake they ever made. The retaliation came faster than I expected. Less than 48 hours after I sent that email, I received a formal letter from the HOA, hand-delivered to my mailbox. The wording was aggressive, laced with a desperate attempt to regain control. They accused me of defamation, claimed my false allegations had damaged the reputation of the HOA, and threatened legal action if I did not issue a public retraction. It was laughable. They had no case, no legal standing, just blind arrogance and the assumption that intimidation would silence me. But I was already 10 steps ahead. I knew this move was coming, which is why I had already reached out to several neighbors, ones who had been victims of the HOA's corruption for years. People who had been fined unfairly, harassed over fabricated violations, or forced into paying money they didn't owe just to avoid further trouble. Their stories were damning, and I had advised them to submit formal complaints alongside mine. If the HOA thought they were just dealing with me, they were about to be blindsided. This wasn't just a battle anymore, it was an uprising. And then, the real escalation began. Surveillance. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but then I noticed the same black SUV idling near my house at odd hours. I saw HOA enforcers lingering near my property longer than usual, scribbling in their notebooks, taking pictures, watching. They wanted to rattle me. They wanted me to second-guess myself, to start feeling the pressure of being under their thumb. It only made me more determined. Then came the petty fines. Notices started arriving almost daily, one for overgrown grass, despite my lawn being immaculate, another for excessive noise, despite me living alone and keeping to myself, and the most ridiculous one yet, a $250 fine for parking a non-compliant vehicle in my driveway. I didn't even own the car they claimed was in violation. They were grasping at straws, desperate to make my life miserable. But I wasn't just playing defense. I was building my case. Every fine, every surveillance attempt, every neighbor's testimony, I documented everything. And then, I pulled out my trump card. A class action lawsuit. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial fraud, illegal fines, harassment, misuse of homeowner funds, and now, targeted retaliation. I drafted a comprehensive lawsuit, including every homeowner willing to stand with me. The HOA wasn't just facing my legal expertise anymore, they were facing an entire community demanding justice. And then, the knock on my door came. 2 HOA officers, flanked by the board president himself. Their faces were stone cold, but their eyes betrayed their unease. They knew. They had overplayed their hand, underestimated the consequences of their arrogance, and now, they were scrambling. They wanted to discuss things. They wanted a settlement, a quiet resolution. But I wasn't interested in quiet. I wanted accountability. I wanted the fraud exposed, the corruption dismantled, and every dime they had stolen returned to the homeowners they had exploited. And as I stood in my doorway, listening to their thinly veiled threats disguised as diplomacy, I made my decision. No deals. No settlements. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about bringing the entire HOA empire crashing down. The moment I refused their so-called settlement offer, the real battle began. I could see the shift in their eyes, the thinly veiled panic behind their forced confidence. They had expected me to fold, to back down the way so many others had before me. But I wasn't like the others. I wasn't intimidated by their fake authority, their empty threats, or their pathetic attempts at damage control. I was ready to bring them down, legally, publicly, and permanently. It didn't take long for the HOA to make their next move. Within days, I received a letter from their attorney, a cease and desist order. It was a desperate attempt to silence me, filled with legal jargon meant to intimidate but lacking any real substance. They accused me of slandering the HOA, of inciting unrest among homeowners, of interfering with community operations. But nowhere in that letter was an actual legal violation. They had nothing. Just more empty threats, more attempts to make me feel like I was in the wrong. It was almost pathetic. What they didn't know was that by sending me that letter, they had just given me even more ammunition. Retaliation was illegal. Under state homeowner protection laws, they had just crossed a line that could get them into even deeper trouble. I wasted no time forwarding the letter to my legal contacts, making sure it would be included in the formal complaint with the state HOA regulatory board. Every move they made only tightened the noose around their own necks. And then, the breaking point came. A whistleblower. One of the HOA board members, one of their own, reached out to me in secret. He had seen what was happening, had watched as the board dug itself into a deeper hole, and he wanted no part of it. What he shared with me was the final nail in their coffin. Financial records. Real, undeniable proof of embezzlement. Documents showing how the board members had funneled thousands of dollars from homeowner fines into personal accounts. Fake invoices, fabricated maintenance expenses, unauthorized withdrawals. The kind of evidence that doesn't just get you fined, it gets you prosecuted. I didn't waste a second. I sent everything to the state attorney's office. I filed an official lawsuit, naming every corrupt board member, every complicit HOA enforcer, every person who had played a role in the scam. The walls were closing in on them now, and they knew it. And then, just when I thought they couldn't sink any lower, they made their final desperate move. They tried to evict me. A fraudulent notice was taped to my door, claiming that my ongoing disruptive actions were grounds for removal from the community. It was an obvious, illegal bluff. They had no authority to evict me. But it was proof of just how far they were willing to go. They weren't just corrupt. They were panicking. That same evening, I held a community meeting, one that the HOA had no power to stop. Homeowners packed into my backyard, furious, ready to fight. I laid everything out before them, the fraudulent fines, the financial theft, the retaliation, the lies. The moment I revealed the whistleblower's documents, the crowd erupted. People who had once been too afraid to speak out were now shouting for accountability, for resignations, for justice. The HOA was finished. And they knew it. The next morning, the news broke. The local media had picked up the story. Homeowners expose HOA corruption in shocking legal battle. Investigators showed up at the HOA office, subpoenaing records, freezing accounts, preparing charges. And just like that, the power the HOA had held over this neighborhood for years was gone. But I wasn't done yet. I wanted to make sure they paid for every single injustice they had committed. And I knew exactly how to do it. The final blow was coming. And this time, there would be no way for them to recover. The fallout was swift and unforgiving. The HOA board collapsed almost overnight. The moment the investigations began, board members started resigning, one after another, scrambling to distance themselves from the scandal. But it was too late. The paper trail was undeniable, the evidence irrefutable. The state attorney's office had already begun criminal proceedings against the key players, freezing their personal assets, issuing subpoenas, and preparing formal charges for fraud, embezzlement, and misuse of funds. The same people who had once strutted around the neighborhood issuing petty fines and flaunting their authority were now facing financial ruin, public disgrace, and possible jail time. And yet, I wasn't satisfied. Not yet. Justice wasn't just about tearing down the corrupt, it was about restoring what was stolen, making sure no one ever suffered under their rule again. So, I pushed harder. I worked with my legal team to file a civil lawsuit on behalf of every homeowner who had been cheated, bullied, or financially drained by the HOA's corrupt practices. Every fraudulent fine, every dollar pocketed, every forced compliance based on lies, it all had to be repaid. The lawsuit demanded full restitution of stolen funds, plus damages for undue stress and harassment. The total amount? Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Meanwhile, the state HOA regulatory board stepped in, launching a full-scale audit that uncovered even more violations, ones that stretched back nearly a decade. False invoices, fabricated maintenance costs, fake citations, the corruption ran deeper than anyone had imagined. The entire HOA structure was declared illegitimate, its authority completely revoked. The board's remaining members, the ones not already facing criminal charges, were permanently banned from serving on any HOA in the state. Their reign of terror was over. Then came the moment of true vindication. At a court-mandated public meeting, the remaining board members, stripped of their power, forced to answer for their crimes, stood before a packed crowd of homeowners. Faces that once carried arrogance and superiority were now hollowed out by fear and shame. They tried to defend themselves, to insist it had all been a misunderstanding, that they had only been following procedure. But the evidence was overwhelming. The crowd wasn't interested in excuses. They wanted justice. And justice is exactly what they got. The civil court ruled in our favor. Every homeowner who had been wronged received full compensation, with the court ordering all stolen funds to be returned with interest. For some, it was a small refund. For others, it was thousands of dollars they had thought lost forever. The money was taken directly from the personal accounts of the corrupt board members, the same people who had spent years weaponizing fines, draining homeowners of their savings, and pretending they were untouchable. Now, they were the ones paying up, watching as their bank accounts dwindled, their reputations shattered beyond repair. And then, the final blow. 2 of the highest-ranking board members were formally indicted for fraud and financial mismanagement. Criminal charges were pressed, and when the news broke, the story went viral. The once feared HOA was now a cautionary tale, a symbol of greed, corruption, and the consequences of unchecked power. Homeowners across the state, even across the country, began filing complaints against their own HOAs, inspired by what we had done. The neighborhood changed overnight. Without the HOA's grip, the fear was gone. No more random fines, no more secret meetings, no more fabricated violations. For the first time in years, homeowners could simply live, free from harassment, free from exploitation, free from the corruption that had ruled for so long. And as I stood on my porch, watching as my neighbors laughed, shared stories, and finally felt safe in their own homes, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: satisfaction. They had come for me over a simple $89 fine. They had thought they could intimidate me, silence me, break me. Instead, they had lost everything. And I had won.